My name is Jim Kalaki. I'm a resident of River Landing, and I am thrilled and delighted to welcome you all to the Fall 22 series of River Landing Conversations. With Kay Heflin, my friend and colleague and co-anchor, we're going to have a series of conversations this fall with residents and staff. They will be aired on Friday afternoons, and on this Friday, we are thrilled and delighted to welcome Lacy Baynes, who is also a resident here and happens to be the current chair of the Resident Council. Lacy, welcome.
Thank you.
We're delighted that you're here. The point of these sessions is for the community to have an opportunity to meet some people. We all know that there is an incredible amount of talent and history and interesting lives and so on that reside amongst our residents and our staff. And this series of conversations is a chance to spotlight some small amounts of those characteristics. We're delighted that you've joined us, and we invite you to tune in every week at this time through the fall semester. Kay, welcome.
Thank you.
To your role, and start us off if you will.
All right. Lacy Baynes.
Yeah.
You have to be the first person I've ever met with the name of Lacy. So I'm sure you get the question a lot, but could you share with us how that name came about?
Well, I am named for my father, so I am Lacy Jr. And I have tried to find out how that name got into my family, and I've been unable to do so. So there are two of us in the Baynes family, and they're the only two Lacys I think I've ever met.
Okay. So it remains a mystery.
It is a mystery,
Okay.
yes.
All right.
Well, that's one we're not going to solve here, I guess.
No, I've tried.
So Lacy, tell us where you were born and about your growing up life.
Well, I was born in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, and we moved to Wilson, North Carolina when I was about 3 years old. And I went to the first grade in Wilson Elementary School. My first grade teacher was Miss Lacy, by the way, so I'll never forget her. And then my family moved to Greensboro, which was basically coming home for them because my father, mother were both raised on tobacco farms up just a little bit north of here. Oak Ridge, my mother, and Summerfield, my father. And I entered the second grade in Greensboro Public Schools, graduated from Greensboro Senior High School, which is now Grimsley, of course, but those of us who graduated from Greensboro Senior High School have never allowed the name to be changed in our presence. I went to University of North Carolina, received a degree in accounting, and then went into the military for 2 years. I was stationed in New York City because it's not the usual place you find Army post, but this was a small installation where they made training films and TV commercials and things like that, and they needed an accountant, so I spent my military career in New York and came back home and started my business career.
How interesting.
And what was your business?
Well, I was an accountant by education, and I worked for a CPA firm for a while, and then a small over-the-counter stock brokerage firm for about 3 years, and then I joined Cone Mills, which was a large textile denim manufacturer principally, headquartered in Greensboro, and I worked for Cone for 30 years. And I would tell people they never could find anything I could do, so they kept moving me around. I was head of the tax department for about 10 years, and then I went into the real estate division of Cone and worked for about 10 years. We were developing land in what's now New Irving Park in Greensboro and Fountain Manor and places like that. A lot of land that Cone Mills owned that it was not going to need for manufacturing. And my last 10 years, I was back at corporate headquarters. I was the secretary of the company, and in our company, the secretary was the administrator of pension retirement plans. So that's how I finished my career.
I was curious, Lacy, I've never asked this question, but everyone who's been around here for a while has heard about Cone and obviously knows about it. And if you haven't, then you've just heard about it. So, but like at the height of its operation, how many people work there or work for Cone?
Back in the 60s, shortly after I went to work for Cone, as I recall, our employment reached around 17,000.
Wow.
Company-wide.
Yeah.
We were, at the time, the largest employer in Guilford County, the largest private employer, non-governmental employer. We're not in the top 10. The remainder of Cone is not in the top 10 now, I'm sure. But it's interesting, I think, the Cone family founded Cone Mills, and it became the largest employer in this area. It also endowed the Cone Hospital, which I believe is one of the largest employers in this area now. So one family has created the employment in two completely different fields for hundreds of years in Greensboro and Guilford County.
Yeah. And did Cone, were they beyond Guilford? Do they have other outlets either around the state or elsewhere in the country? Or were they pretty much here?
I think about 20, maybe a couple less plants throughout the Southeast, and one, a dyeing chemical plant in New Jersey in the heyday of the textile business.
Is Cone Mills still in operation?
No, a part of it is. There's a business called Cone Denim, and it's a division of another company, and it has some employees here in Greensboro, but it is the last part of Cone that still exists. And I think there's a finishing plant down in Carlisle, South Carolina that's still in operation.
Well, you had a very busy career. When you retired, what was it like adjusting to retirement after that, and what interests did you find to pursue?
Well, there was very little adjustment. I have stayed busy, and I've had very interesting challenges along the way. When I first retired, I did some fundraising and charitable things. I was on the board of the American Red Cross local chapter, and we raised the money to build the chapter house that's over on Yanceyville Road. And then I became a board member of Goodwill Industries here for several years. Been a long time board member of United Methodist Foundation for Western North Carolina, which is headquartered in Huntersville now, and I'm still an honorary member of that board. One thing I did that I'm kind of proud of, to tell you the truth, I realized that in my education I had little history or little exposure to what I consider to be good literature. And I checked around and found that UNCG had a program at the time, and it was called Master of Arts in Liberal Studies. So I went back to school, and I got my master's degree in liberal studies at age 70. I think there weren't many students older than I at the university at that time, but it's the most enjoyable educational experience I think I've ever had. We studied good literature, good historical periods, and some other courses too. And I was in classes with mostly younger people, but they accepted me and I enjoyed it. So it was a great experience I'd recommend for anybody.
So you're a terrific example of lifelong learning being alive and well.
Yeah, it works. I'll vote for it anytime.
Well, speaking, Lacy, of lifelong learning, if I could take you back a wee bit, there's two things that I've thought about that I know are in your past. One is a little bit further back, I think, and that was your service as a member of the school board in Guilford County.
Oh, I was appointed to the Greensboro City Board of Education back in 75, I believe it was, and I served for the remainder of the term I was appointed to fill and one subsequent term, and then we changed to an elected school board, and I don't think I have many political skills, so I didn't choose to run. And after almost 8 years on the school board, you maybe have given them your best. So I believe in term limits, I guess.
And that was when I always found this interesting in North Carolina, that the Guilford City, you mentioned Greensboro city schools. The city schools and the county schools were two different systems, at least when you came into it. Did that change? I know they've changed since, but was that in your time on the board?
I recall, under North Carolina law, every county is required to have a school system. And back when we were talking about it in the 70s, a number of cities opted to have their own school system. And the school district lines were not always contiguous with the city lines, but they developed a school district that included most of the city, or all the city, and that became the Greensboro district. High Point was a separate school system. And we operated in Guilford County with 3 school systems for a number of years. They merged, and I can't remember the year, but it was in the late 80s, or about that time. And so now we just have one school system.
I know there are a few places still in the state where the city or a city, there's a separate school system between that and the county, and that gives new meaning to political intrigue and resource allocation.
Fund of superintendent's job and things like that, because the state will not fund but one superintendent per county.
Yeah, interesting. The second thing I wanted to be sure and touch on is something that you and your beloved wife, Lena, introduced us to a couple of years ago, and that's through your church, the Christmas Jazz Program. That people, if you don't know this is, please listen, because this is an absolute fabulous program that you've, I know, had a big hand in getting to Greensboro.
That I think is an interesting story, and it's something we just more or less fell into. I read a book by Charles Kuralt that he had written following his retirement at CBS, and Charles Kuralt and I were in the same class at Chapel Hill. although I did not know him. He was in the School of Journalism, I suppose, and I went to business school. But I had followed his career because of being, I guess, in the same college class. And I thought he was just a great reporter, television personality. And I read his book that he had written right after retirement, and he talked about being in New York in the month of December and going to the Jazz Nativity in New York City, just as a visitor. And he talked about what great music it was and how when the trombone came in playing, the wise men, three wise men, they gave them a standing ovation, and the title was Bending Toward the Light. And I thought that's just the greatest title for any program I've ever heard. And I kept talking about it, and Lena said, well, talk to Bill Carroll. He was our music director at West Market Church at the time. He had done some religious jazz program for us. And I gave Bill copies of the pages in Charles Corral's book. He looked them over and came back and said, do you think we can get the score? I'd like to look at it. And I didn't know, all I knew that it last was performed at Lincoln Center. So we just called Lincoln Center and said, if you wanted to do the Jazz Nativity, whom would you contact? And they gave me the name of the composer. I didn't have to go through agents and lawyers or anything that you expect when you're dealing with New York. And we called her name is Ann Phillips. Her sister, late sister, was an artist in Winston-Salem, so she was familiar with the area. And she sent us the score, and Bill looked it over and decided to do it. And I think it's probably been performed in Greensboro area for about 25 years now. And it is a great program, and we would fill the sanctuary at West Market Church on the second weekend of December. I think it was the time we performed. But it just getting to see that done by real jazz musicians and was to me a real thrill. And we got to meet Charles Corral as a result of that.
Wow.
And meet Ann Phillips too, because she came down to see one of our performances.
Is it ongoing? Will it be happening this year?
It was performed last year down at Rehoboth United Methodist Church, and we took a bus from here for a group that wanted to go, and it was same qualities, some of the same musicians, and so it is ongoing, yeah.
Okay. So we'll stay tuned, and maybe you'll
Right.
let people know when it's
I
coming
hope
up.
it will be an ongoing thing at Rehoboth Church now.
Okay. Great.
It's an absolutely fabulous thing. I think when I think of things that have happened to me and to Helen since we came to River Landing, this is an absolute highlight. It's and the musicians are a lot, mostly local folks. There's a lot of musicians from the various music departments at the various colleges and universities around, and it is just, it gives new meaning to ensemble, I think, in a really coming together kind of way. And so, as Kay says, stay tuned.
Yes.
We'll be, I assume, River Landing and Lacy will be announcing this probably in November or early
Hope
December.
it will be out there for us.
Yeah.
We were the first, Greensboro was the first location it was performed outside of New York City. And we get a little advertisement from that sometimes. but it has been performed in a number of places now. At one time, they took an old refurbished theater in Trenton, New Jersey, and did the performance there, and took a train chartered train or train car, more likely, from New York City to Trenton and back. I've always wished I had gone to that. That would have been a real experience too, I think. But it's been performed in Houston and a number of other cities I can't name, but I know a number of other places. But we started the movement outside of New York.
Excellent. Well, let's get on to more present-day topics.
Okay.
How did you find River Landing? How long have you and Lena been here?
Well, I've been here since November 2018, so we're approaching 4 years. We knew about River Landing because I've lived in Greensboro all my life since the second grade. And we checked around, and we knew a few residents here. I liked the golf course. We liked the plan, the way, the style of living here. And so we put our names on the list, and we were probably about 3 years before we were able to move. It has fully met our expectations. I guess the one thing I would say to anybody who's asking about River Landing is there are so many people out here that are accomplished, knowledgeable, interesting people. Now, it might be that way in other retirement communities, but just about everybody you run into has an interesting story to tell and a lot of accomplishments they can be proud of. And that has been just a real plus for us in living out here. And they're all friendly and warm and welcoming. There's not a cliquish feeling at all out here.
Right, absolutely.
What kinds of things have you gotten involved with yourself here?
Well, I guess the most important thing I've done is to become chair of the resident council, which has been an interesting job and a job I really appreciate having the opportunity to do. Have learned a lot about how River Landing operates, and I'm always amazed. We have 600 plus residents and probably 400 plus or minus people that come into our community every day to work in the building or out on the ground. So we have a city, a little town more aptly, of 1,000 people here every day of the week. You just don't, driving by, you would never stop and think, that's an independent town, 1,000 people. And it's very complex. It doesn't all happen just automatically. And we have very capable people that are making it happen. And I can be a real ambassador for River Landing and the place, the quality of life that it will offer you.
Can you tell us a little bit about the council and what it's charged with? I think a lot of people here don't really know how the council interacts with the administration.
Okay. Well, the council consists of 8 residents. We're elected for 2-year terms, so there are 4 people elected each year, elected in January, and your term of office starts in February. The bylaws don't require this as an absolute thing, but it strongly suggests that there be 4 members from the apartment, we could say inside this building, and 4 from the outlying houses. And it also strongly suggests that 4 of our members be women and 4 be men. And in my time, we've maintained that those distinctions. The purpose of the council, I think, is to serve as a communications arm for all the residents. We don't have operating authority. I can't go over and tell Scooter to go mow my yard this afternoon, for example. But if my yard is getting too deep, I can, as a council, I could go to the council and say, they're not mowing my yard, please help me out. And I would be invited to a meeting with Scooter, or if I wasn't satisfied, I could have a meeting with Tom Smith. Those are things you can do for yourself. You don't have to have the council as an intermediary. But if residents, and a lot of residents, particularly younger residents, might feel a little uncomfortable being told, go see Tom Smith and get this, he'll take care of this for you, or he will let you know why it can't be taken care of. If the council will agree to, or a member of the council will agree to go to talk with Tom, with the resident, that is the kind of support we try to offer. And then, of course, we have the direct responsibility of the Employee Appreciation Fund, which starts pretty soon. The raising of money, which lets us give year-end Christmas gifts to all our employees. We run the gift shop upstairs, and that produces the money that we have to give a gift to the community each year. And last year, for example, we gave the lights that were put on the new trees up at the entrance on Links Drive. So we try to be involved, and in this second half of the year, we're more involved than we are in the first half, because just the timing of the things we do. And then we are the nominating committee for the continuing resident council, and later this year we'll be asking for not volunteers so much as individuals who would like to be members of the council to submit their names, and then the nominating committee will consider a slate of 4 nominees to present in January.
Lacy, as you think of your sort of the span of your life, who are 2 or 3, 4 people that if the boring details could get taken care of magically, that you would love to sit with and have a conversation, and why?
It'd be easier to name 30 or 40, but if I had to just choose 3 this morning, I think number 1 would be my father. He died when I was 7. He was only 32, and he was a businessman. In fact, he was an accountant also. And I'm sure he would have been extremely successful in his business career. And I would just like to, I don't have very many memories of my father, who back in those days, he was working long hours because of just the times we were in. So I remember a man with a suit and a hat and going and coming, but not sitting around home and listening to the radio much, or doing a lot with family, because work took most of his waking time. And I would just like to talk with him and see what he thought of my career and tell me more about his and his life, and I might could learn where my name came from too. That would be one of my choices. The second choice, or a second choice, would be Winston Churchill, because this comes from my MALS program. I'm convinced that he almost individually saved Western civilization through his intellect and the power of his public speaking and his just true love of freedom and the English world. He stood almost alone against the Nazis in World War II, and eventually pulled together a coalition of nations that could defeat Nazism. And we don't know anybody more than we owe Churchill for doing that. And I think a third person that I would like to talk to, if he would talk to me, and that's the big question mark, is John Adams.
Oh.
Because I think he probably understood the details, inner workings of our form system of government better than anybody, even Thomas Jefferson, because he was a nuts and bolts detail man, and I think he could give you a lot of inside information on how our government came to be and what the advantages and disadvantages and problems would be. So
Fascinating.
that I would like to spend time with him. And I could go on, but you asked for three.
We have another question on here. We've talked a little bit about the jazz program, but do you have other musical interests?
Yes, I am very much in the 40s, 50s big band era. That music I really enjoy, and almost any of it I really enjoy. And I like a lot of the Broadway music that came out about that time. And jazz would be a close second. And I really like a little bit of most any style of music. I like some opera, some symphonies, and some country and western music. But if I had to rank it in order, big band sounds and then jazz would be way up at the top.
Indeed. Well, I suspect you've enjoyed Rod Winter's contributions to our community here in big band.
I played in the band. I started in the 4th grade and played.
Yeah. What did you play?
I played a cornet and trumpet with the high school orchestra, and I played 2 years at Chapel Hill, but I got too busy after that. But I quit at that point and really couldn't.
My favorite phrase in life is that life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. And I was just getting busy, Lacy, to ask you, as we draw this to a close, is there anything that you had anticipated talking about in this discussion that we haven't gotten to, or that you have, by way of your closing statement to the world of River Landing?
I can't think of anything. Pretty well covered my life.
Well, we certainly do thank you for being with us today.
Well,
And
thank you for
I'm sure
having
all the
me.
residents who watch this will also thank you for sharing.
Well, thank
Great.
you. We enjoyed it.
And thank you all for joining us for this opening edition in the River Landing Conversation Series. We invite you to tune in again at the same time next week when we will have another River Landing conversation. Thank you and good afternoon.